Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my introduction to embroidery series. I hope you're all sitting down with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and relaxing so that you can watch me do a bit of work. Now when I say embroidery, I'm talking about hand embroidery, and I'm talking about what's called freestyle embroidery. In other words, no charts, no kits. I won't be using transfers. We'll just be mooching around, designing our own bits and pieces to embroider. No big projects, just something really, really easy. And you're going to say, what do you need, Geraldine? Now, the first thing you need for embroidery or any kind of sewing or stitching is good light. Otherwise, you'll ruin your eyes. So that's the most important thing. And I think as most of us as crafters, we know that already, even if we, don't go abide by the rule. Anyway, the next thing you need is something to embroider. And I have a pile of bits and pieces here. I have this linen look fabric that I got in. You can get this in the range, and it's packeted as craft under the Craft Sensations brand. But anything that is, you can see that it's closely woven. It won't fray. Hasn't got holes in it. Well, it will fray at the edges, but what I mean is when you pull it, it doesn't kind of come asunder. Something like that. Any heavy cotton. This is called, well, we call it calico. It's called calico or muslin. It's kind of a heavy duty cream cotton, excellent for embroidery. I've ironed a bit of Vilene onto the back of it, which is how I strengthen lightweight materials. You can also do the Vilene trick with pillowcases. If you have nothing else to embroider on and your pillowcases are a bit light, you have pillowcases and you're going to cut them up, is what I mean. You can get iron-on Vilene either, you see there it has a shiny side that you iron on and then an ordinary dull matte side, and that will strengthen and stabilize a lot of thin fabrics. Or if somebody asks you to embroider on a blouse or something very light, you can iron this on behind where you're going to embroider. Another good old standby is denim. This is an old pair of denim trousers of mine that have been washed about 100 times or more, and they're gone quite thin. Anyone who lived through the 1970s will probably have encountered hand embroidered denim. I think it was kind of the heyday of embroidery, and it was the time that knocked the whole Victorian badge out of embroidery. Embroidery was seen as, modern and, very cool in those days. And if you didn't have an embroidered pair of flares, if the legs, in other words, for younger people, if the legs of your flared trousers weren't embroidered, or you didn't have an embroidered skirt, you just weren't part of the scene. Embroidery, and especially embroidered bags as well, all part of the 70s. Happy days, which are kind of coming back in fashion and everything. But what we're going to be embroidering on today is felt. This is the easiest thing to embroider on, and everything, felt shows off your stitches beautifully. And then you can kind of go on and try other fabrics. But I'd recommend, if you're starting off stitching or embroidery, I would recommend felt. Like some people use nothing else but felt, and they produce brooches, bags, everything in it. Unfortunately with felt, you can't wash it. It's not really a fabric. It's more, this felt I'm using is 100% acrylic. What does it say here? Acrylic felt. And it's not really suitable for clothes, but you can make lots of little items with it. Brilliant for making embellishments, for putting on junk journals and cards, anything like that. We'll get on to that later. And what I have done is I've got a bit of 4x6 card, and I've drawn around it with a chalk marker, and that can be a template for a postcard. If you are a crafter and you're a paper crafter, you'll have loads of dies that you can cut out and use as templates to embroider inside and out. Now when I was doing this, I remembered, thankfully, to leave a good space around it so I can hold it. For a small piece of fabric like this, if you're going to embroider it, you won't need a hoop. And I know most people are terrified of embroidery hoops and that kind of mechanism. And no, for a small bit of fabric, you don't need it. It's really only if you're embroidering something big like a tablecloth or a cushion. But if you feel more comfortable with a hoop, use a hoop. I'll show you what I'm talking about. This is a wooden hoop, and these are the cheapest ones you can buy. Now you can also buy plastic ones. I have an old metal one, but I don't know if they're still available. But I'm sure you'll have seen cross stitchers use very elaborate frames and hoops. You don't need any of them for this stuff. But as I said, if you feel more comfortable, use the hoop. Also, I wouldn't put felt in a hoop because it could pull it. Fabrics to avoid would be anything furry or anything stretchy. In other words, don't use toweling or towels. Don't use velvet. I know your granny probably embroidered on velvet, but it's not ideal for starting off. So anything with what they call a nap or a pile, don't use it. Just stick to flat fabrics. Think of your canvas or your jeans or pillowcases, absolutely flat, like this fellow here. Now the next thing is needles, and all I can say really is if you go into a sewing shop or a fabric shop, you'll see dozens of different sizes of hand sewing needles, and just pick something that's comfortable for you. I'll show you what I use. I use these quite often, especially for embroidering on thick fabrics. They're called chenille needles and they're designed for tapestry. You'll also come across embroidery needles. There's nothing special about these. They have except they have a long narrow eye, but make sure when you get your needles, just make sure that you can thread them easily with whatever thread you're using, and also make sure that they go through the fabric you're using easily. You'll get the hang of it. Maybe just get a packet of assorted needles if you haven't got them already, and just keep, try them out, trial and error, try them out one by one. And also I find that you use a longish needle, not usually in assortments of needles. There's small needles that are only about an inch or an inch and a half. Don't go near them because you won't really be able to maneuver them very well. And the next thing we come to is thread. Now, most of you will be familiar with this kind of stuff. This is stranded cotton, and it's also known as floss in North America. And what you do with this is you pull about 18 inches of it out of the skein, or the skein, I think is what they're called. You pull out about 18 inches, and you'll find that there's 6 little strands, and you can divide them up. You could use 1 strand, 2 strands, etc., etc. Now, traditionally, you're supposed to pull each strand off one by one and then recombine them. But I mean, you can judge whether or not to do that yourselves. And this is the traditional embroidery thread that a lot of you will be familiar with. And I know you're going to say to me, Geraldine, we're in lockdown, the shops are closed, what else can I use? While I'm at it, this is what I do with those. I wind them onto little bobbins and I write down the make and the number. I'll go back into my thread here. I say here, there's a number attached to each skein, and that's so that if you run out, you'll know what to order again, just like wool knitting or sewing. And there's 2 main brands that I find. There's Anchor and there's DMC, which I think are produced in France. There's also another brand called Madeira, but I haven't come across that for years. So if you can find any of these knocking around, use them. Now, another thing, in shops like, say, craft places, you'll find these massive packs of these embroidery threads, 100 threads for a very small amount of money. Don't go near them because they're not that good. The chances are the dyes could run, also that they could fray and go fluffy once you're embroidering with them, pulling them through the fabric. If you have to buy a big pack, get the dearer ones, if you know what I mean. But this is what I use, and they're easier to find, and they're also probably work out cheaper in the long run. Now, I'm going to be embroidering with 4-ply cotton. This is what you'd use for knitting or hand knitting or crochet. And one thing I use a lot of now is pearl cotton. I'll show you the band. So if anyone you know does a bit of crochet, they'll have this. This is number 5 cotton. Now number 5, number 12, number 8, they're all different thicknesses of this, and they can all be used for embroidery. Now you don't have to have this brand. There's other brands out there. So try first, or any kind of thin cotton, number 10 cotton. As I say, if anyone you know does cotton, does crochet, they'll be able to help you out. But this is easy to get, not necessarily that brand, but any kind of thin cotton thread, easy to get, and you might already have it in the house. So that's ideal to start off with, and it's ideal for working through felt. Now, another thing I use is markers. You see, I have used this fabric marker here. It's a kind of a chalk marker, and you just mark out where you want to stitch. Let's say I want to do a few lines like a plant or something. I have to put it on something, put something solid under it, and just mark it where you're going to stitch. Of course, it's not coming out very well, but you can see here I did the outline of the postcard shape with it, and you can get a packet of these, and they come in pink, white and blue. And then you can use this, the little brush at the end, for taking away the colour when you're finished. Now, usually I find this fades as I embroider, so you don't really need to bother about it. There are other markers that you probably have if you sew. Probably have one of these fabric markers. Here again, it's not coming out, but it leaves a purple line, and it gradually disappears. It's what they call an air marker, and you can also put water on it to get rid of it. But there's lots of these. But anything really that's washable or that's very light, I could also have run a line of running stitch around there just to mark the area. Just don't get too hung up about it, because it's a lot easier than I've probably made it too complicated. But if you buy a book about embroidery, there'll be pages and pages and pages of an introduction, and none of it is really that necessary. It'll only kind of put you off. Now, another thing you need is your scissors. Good old scissors. I'm sure you know that already. So I'm going to just demonstrate a few outline stitches here, and I'm going to do it on the felt. Now, before I stitch, I usually thread up several needles so that I don't have to be stopping and, rethreading. And this is what the needles come like in packets. That's another, I think they're kind of smaller needles. You can see how I can thread those easily, and they will go through the felt easily. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to show you is some outline stitches. Now, one of these you know already, and I'm sure you're saying, why is she showing us something we knew already? And it's the running stitch. Now, you'll notice I don't have a knot. I never use a knot, because especially if you're going to frame things or use something, you'll see the bulge of the knot coming through your fabric. So ignore the horrible fingers. I usually start off by bringing the needle through the fabric and making a little back stitch just to hold the fabric in place. Now for a running stitch, sorry, bring the cover down. It's just in and out like that, in a straight line, or wherever you want to go. And this is the stitch that's used a lot in the slow stitching. You go in and out, and that's your basic running stitch. It's just in and out along a line, or wherever you want to go. You can do it along a curve. It's just your basic stitch. And if you make very long running stitches, that's known as tacking, which I put around the edge just to show the shape. You can also do single stitches like this, and that's called a single straight stitch, and that can look like the stem of a plant, and these can look like little, few random straight stitches can look like, you know, a little plant with leaves sprouting from the bottom of it. And you don't need any kind of line or anything to do this. This can be just done totally at random. Another stitch which is used to make stems is called stem stitch. Here again, you have to imagine you have a line, an imaginary line running along. I'll try and mark it here with another marker here. See here my little purple line. I'm just finishing off here and bringing the thread. And you take slanting stitches across the line, slanting straight stitches across the line. Just push them into position. And try not to jab the needle into your thread. Once you get the hang of this stitch, it's very fast. It's just your imaginary line here and a slanting stitch across it. And this is also great for stems or for any kind of an outline. You can see where you can make the stem stitch either very thin or quite fat. So there you are, you have this nice outline stitch. And then there's the good old back stitch. Turn the fabric round. You bring your needle up. You do. Start off as if you're doing a running stitch, bring your needle up, put it down, and bring it up again. Then put the needle back down, and bring it out in front. Bring the needle back down here. Bring the needle, cover the bare bit, and bring it up the same distance in front. That's another outline stitch, and it's also a stitch that's used if you're sewing two fabrics together to kind of make a very solid join. So you can see how that's 3 stitches: your running stitch, your stem stitch, back stitch, and then just random straight stitches. So it's actually 4 ways of embroidering an outline. Now we'll say goodbye to our green thread and we'll get a pink thread, if I can find it. As I said, this is only an introduction, and I'll go over these stitches again, and we will be using them over and over again. So here I'm just making a little straight stitch with pink. There again, I'm kind of back stitching over it like this. And just making random straight stitches out of, see the way they're coming out of the top of the stem, so that it looks kind of like an iris or a daisy, or just a rough indication of a flower. That's all. You don't need transfers or massive charts. I know that's just a start, and I'll show you where I've used these stitches in one of my tags, again if I can find it. I showed you this tag in my last video. I had hope done in purple, in the purple back stitch or lilac back stitch. Then I decided it looked a bit weedy, so I did another row of back stitch around it, and those are the stitches there that I'm showing you, and they're done in the stranded cotton or floss. I used 3 strands in the needle and just did the stem twice, and then added just random little straight stitches in yellow to look like iris. Now around the edge here, you can see this bit here, I did running stitch, you can see it in the turquoise, and then I just ran a length of metallic thread around it, you know, on top of the surface. I will be showing you how to do this, and you can see the stem stitch here done in purple to make kind of a panel around the hope. And that's all you need to do really to create a picture. There's no fancy stitches whatsoever, just your outline stitches and straight stitches, and then a few stitches around the edge to hold it in place. And I will be backing. Now the back doesn't look great, but I will be lining the back and covering it. So I hope this encourages you to grab a needle and try a bit of embroidery. It's a lovely hobby and it's very relaxing in these kind of fraught days, let's put it like that. And it's also a great skill to teach children. I know if my aunt hadn't showed me how to embroider when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I wouldn't be here today talking to you. So I'm kind of dedicating this video to my aunt. She died about 13, 14 years ago, and I do miss her, and she'd love to see this. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Bye.